Tipp today on 1-800-938-007.
Welcome back to the show. Now it's time for our Friday panel, and I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Leahy, Anita Byrne and Phil Prendergast for our first panel of 2017. Welcome to you all, and thanks for being here with us.
Happy New Year to everybody, and thanks.
Many happy returns. Nice Christmas?
Yeah, it was nice. It was quiet and it was peaceful and it was,
And now you're on the panel.
And now we're on the panel again, and thanks for having us here,
Not at all, always a pleasure. And also for the listeners as well, if you want to add your voice to anything we're discussing during our panel discussion today, 1800 938 007, or you can text 083 311 3311. Now, our first topic today and this week will be vaccinations, because it's a contentious subject. It rears its head every so often. I think the new controversy surrounding the HPV vaccine has kind of reared the head of whether parents should be getting vaccinations. Parents tend to fall on either side. It's very difficult to find a parent who's in the middle. They're either very for or very against. I'll throw to the panel: vaccinations, good thing, a bad thing? Are parents right to have concerns? Okay, Phil, I know you work in the health profession, as we all know, for many, many years. I presume parents have come to you and expressed concerns about vaccinations to you.
Yeah, and I suppose, Alison, I know two girls that had very adverse reactions to the vaccine. The vaccine is given routinely to 13-year-olds, and the idea is that the HPV, which is the human papilloma virus, is a virus that's contracted through sexual contact, and the idea is to immunise girls before sexual contact is initiated. And I think, and I'm speaking now as a mother of sons. I don't have a daughter, but I would actually I would exercise wise counsel if it was me, simply because I do know girls that were fine and are not fine subsequent to getting the vaccine. However, as a nurse and a midwife, and we vaccinate and have looked at vaccinations, and my children had their routine vaccinations, and I did it unquestionably, and also because I was in that system. I would have to say that the flip side of it is that if you're the one, you do have a choice about what your child gets. And of course, a child at 13, I don't think is in a position to either say yes or no to sexual contact, and it's also illegal before the age of 17. And I'm saying that from the perspective I teach sexual health to young people in schools. It's a question, I think, that we must stop following blindly. There are the amount of vaccine that's given seems to be way in excess of what you're trying to sort out. And if the problem is sexual contact at the age of 13, I think that there's time. You have time to decide that, look, we have time to consider this. Do I need to take a vaccine into my body that may adversely affect me? Or do we take the vaccine and hope that this is going to prevent you ever getting a cervical cancer? So there's a balance to be struck.
You sound unsure yourself about it.
I think if I had a daughter, I actually wouldn't give the vaccine.
Really?
But I'm saying that very advisedly, because a lot of people are perfectly happy to give vaccines. They are hoping they're going to do their job. But for the two girls that I know that was adversely affected, their life is very changed. And they are fatigued chronically. They are ill. They're unable to complete the school day. They have to go lie down during school time. They have to, that's very debilitating. So I'm only doing the flip side, and I would like to say I'd like to have a balanced discussion. I think you've given the pro side. I'm doing the devil's advocate and giving the other side of it, simply because people get adverse reactions to vaccines. And when you know a real life human being that was full of life and full of vim and full of vigour and full of all the things young people are, and suddenly they're like a flattened creature, you have to say, well, okay, in their case it wasn't the best thing for them.
Now, Anita, I know you want to come back in on this, but is it a case of, though, that a drug isn't a one size fits all for everybody? Drugs will affect different people differently, and there is no denying that vaccines have the potential to affect people that won't necessarily affect others.
So I just think that there is it's not that I think, I know for a fact there is a global movement where some right-wing conservative evangelists, Christian groups, are afraid that the HPV vaccine may promote promiscuity, and they often put out propaganda, negative things about the vaccine. So, this is something that it's a bigger problem. It's not just related to the HPV. There is another anti-vaccine movement in general against MMR and against other vaccines. So we just need to really listen to the experts and listen to the people that are fully qualified, like the Irish Cancer Society, the HSE. These people are saying the vaccine is safe, and they're the people that we should be listening to.
But they also said that drug for morning sickness was safe, that deformed many babies. Well, I can't remember the name of it. Thalidomide. Yeah.
Completely different situation though. And again, it was like that was, 60 years ago. Things have progressed hugely. This particular vaccine, it was out 10 years ago. We've had 10 years of studies of it. There's been 200 million doses of it given worldwide. There's been studies done where they have literally studied millions of girls in the Scandinavian countries. There's been recently in Australia, there's been a study that has looked at it and has shown that it has reduced cervical cancer by 50%. So we have to remember why the vaccine has been given as well. It's been given that it hugely decreases the risk of women developing cervical cancer. Not just cervical cancer though, it's anal cancer, penile cancer, throat cancer, and that's why it's advisable for it to be given to boys as well. So, there's a huge amount of scaremongering and misinformation, and at the end of the day, do people want to protect their children and their girls against cervical cancer, or do they want to have the risk of them maybe potentially very, very small risk of them having a small adverse reaction to it?
Okay, Joe, what are your views on the vaccination programme?
It's a subject I might as well tell you I don't know very much about, but I do know of an individual whose child has got it, and it has absolutely been horrifying for the family. That's the truth now. They're up in the morning, they have to set the clock to get up at 5 o'clock, and the whole household is disruptive just as a result of this one thing. And I think it's and while it affects one, it's the family of this individual that it has affected, that has turned their whole life upside down. They have to have a bed in school that they can fall asleep in the middle of the day, and they can't go on holidays. It puts desperate strains on absolutely everybody, and to get young siblings within that family to buy into this is very, very life-changing. It's very, very traumatic. And while, I would agree with what your comment was there, it's not a question of one size fits all. I think what Anita has said is right to a point. Fine if it works. But what happens when it doesn't work?
Yeah.
And I think this here is the problem, and there's no point in saying it'll be fine, and if there's only 1% that's affected, there's no point in saying, well look, there's 99% that's positive. What about the 1% that is negatively affected? And I would be inclined to say, up to each individual, like each family themselves, and let them do enough research, and once they're happy, then go ahead with it, but not until they're happy enough to do it.
Because 1% might seem small, but it's still going to affect a lot of people.
Well, if that 1% happens to be in your house,
exactly,
by God, I'll tell you, you have problems.
Phil?
I would agree with you. See, I know personally 2 girls that were not the same after they got the vaccine. And I know that that's given a one-sided view, but it is the flip side.
Exactly.
And it isn't the blind following the blind and say vaccinations are great. Per se, they've eradicated polio. They've done huge good. There's no doubt about that. There was back in the early 90s the link with autism and giving childhood vaccines. That was disproven. And then there's if you search Dr. Google, as Anita said, you're going to find alternative views, and you're going to find people that are maybe zealous and really anti everything. I was never anti everything in my life, but I'm certainly saying that this is about sexual contact. It's given at the age of 13. I think there's some breathing space here to make a decision. Do you want to sit down and have a chat about sexually transmitted infections, how they're transmitted, what the effect is? The fact that the cervix, which is the part of the body that's affected, is not even, you're not going to get an accurate smear result until after the age of 23.
Okay.
So you're talking about a 10-year lacuna between cervical changes that can be recognised and acted upon after getting a vaccine that's supposed to prevent something.
Wow.
So we're talking about results of smear tests that may not give you an accurate result, or may not accurately represent what's going on with the cervix, because it hasn't reached that level of maturity until about the age of 23. And again, that varies with age, and it also will vary with the amount of partners somebody has, with the amount of activity, the age of onset, all of that. And I'm not speaking morally here, I'm speaking practically.
Anita, if we could go back to the childhood vaccination programme.
Yeah.
And I know that study that was published in the early 90s linking the MMR to autism, it's been discredited many times, but there are very few parents who will say that their child hasn't been affected from MMR. I know it myself. I've gone through MMR twice and I had different children for 6 weeks after.
Anything to do with vaccines, it all relates back to, or any misinformation about vaccines, it relates back to Andrew Wakefield. And he is, it's funny because people that are about, that a lot of the anti-vaccine movement that are against vaccines, they'll say things like, you know, the pharmaceutical company is making money out of vaccines and they're trying to make people sick and follow the money. Ironically, Andrew Wakefield is making an awful lot of money himself going around the world telling people that vaccines are unsafe when they're not. There's very, very few professionals, health professionals that agree with him, and those health professionals that do agree with him would have very, very dubious views regarding vaccines themselves. So, you know, most people that know exactly what they're talking about will tell you that what Andrew Wakefield has to say about the MMR and about the relationship with that with autism is absolutely nonsense.
But there are a lot of parents who will say that my child changed completely after the MMR.
Well, you know, if somebody presumes that something is going to happen to them before they actually, if somebody says to you, there's a chance that if you have a vaccine, you might feel faint, or you might get a red arm, or you might feel a little bit of fatigue. If they tell you that before you get the vaccine, there's a good chance that after, when you get a vaccine, you might feel that yourself, you know, feel a little bit faint. You know, sometimes there is a certain amount of psychosomatic feelings to things when it comes to vaccines. You know, if somebody presumes they're going to be a certain way, they get a vaccine and they are that way afterwards, they'll put two and two together. It's like people that think that they get the flu vaccine and
you're going to get the flu.
You're going to get the flu, and after they get the flu vaccine, they have a little bit of a cold and they blame the flu vaccine for it, which is absolutely impossible. They would have already had either gotten the flu or would have had a cold before they got the flu vaccine, and blaming the flu vaccine, it's absolutely impossible for it to get the flu after the flu vaccine. So, you know, these things happen. It's like, somebody putting two and two together, coming up with something that is completely inappropriate and that doesn't make sense. But I think what we have to remember when it comes to vaccines is we have to keep on looking at the science of it. We have to keep on looking at the evidence, and we have to keep on looking at the statistics. There are anecdotes, and there are people out there who are sick, and nobody is saying that they're not sick. But what I would be very curious is what evidence is there that they are sick because of the vaccine? Okay. What has their GP said? What has specialists said? Have they been to, you know, the hospital? What has the hospital said? If it's a case that medical experts are saying we don't know why you're sick, how can you put that down to a vaccine? All you're doing then is grabbing at straws. You're looking for answers for something. Suddenly this group comes in and says, I know, it's the vaccine, this is what it did for you. And then the hope that those people have, that suddenly somebody's going to listen to them and listen to their pain and listen through what they're going through, they're going to put two and two together, and they're going to presume that it's something that it probably isn't.
Okay, we'll have to park that issue. We need to take an ad break. Coming up after the ad break, we'll be talking about Apollo House.
Join the conversation in Tipperary. Contact us through Facebook, Twitter, or email tiptoday@tippfm.com.
Welcome back to the show. Now, some reaction to our first panel topic discussion this morning, which was about vaccinations. Dee in Clonmel says, why has the HPV vaccine been banned in some other countries if it is safe? Catherine says it's a known fact that pharmaceutical firms use selective data to convince the FDA and other regulatory bodies that their drugs are safe. One pharmaceutical firm in America recently stated it's their aim to have everyone from the day they are born until the day they die. For instance, the menopause is not a disease, but pharmaceutical firms would have us believe that. Also, Noelle texted in to say she agrees with Phil. She is pro-vaccine. Her children are up to date on their vaccines, but there's no way her daughter is getting the HPV vaccine. I don't understand the rush to vaccinate. We'll make a decision at a later time. Also, another woman texted in to say, I'm a mother of a child who stopped talking after the jab. How is that? All in my mind, as Anita implied. Now, moving on to our next topic, which is